We interrupt this program to bring you...
nightmares. Yeah, that's how I felt. That's how I felt, Courage, when I was a child watching your freaking demented little show. Thanks for scarring my childhood.
You know what my favorite cartoon on TV was when I was growing up?
Courage. Closer. Closer.
You guessed it! Courage the Cowardly Dog. Cartoon Network's eerie, bizarre, goofy, comedy, horror-themed late 1990s acid trip that everyone remembers being horrified, or at least a little creeped out and entranced by in their childhoods.
On this night of the harvest moon, when all that grows from the soil is celebrated, you have nothing.
This is what children used to see on TV. This is what children used to see on TV.
You're not perfect.
This is what children used to see on TV! And the funny thing is, it never wasn't like this.
Seriously, I feel like back in the 80s and 90s, there were so many insane, messed up cartoons and kids shows aired on television that parents in no way would stand for today. Like, not only was there creepy old Courage, but there was also, I don't know, Ren and Stimpy. Yeah, remember that show?
Mom, turn the TV on! I want to watch Nickelodeon!
Obviously, Courage the Cowardly Dog was nowhere near as twisted for children as Ren and Stimpy was. It came around a lot later, and it was certainly a bit softer in comparison. And see, I don't just like Courage because it's twisted. I don't just like it because it's creepy or gross. No, I like Courage because it's indescribable. It's a strange cartoon. It's a stupid cartoon. It's an atmospheric, surreal, colorful, multimedia cartoon. Seriously, you can't just watch one episode of this show and understand everything it has lying under its skin. So what is Courage about? Well, it follows a story of an adorable paranoid purple dog, ironically named Courage, who's always absolutely afraid of all his surroundings. And for pretty good reason. Courage lives with a sweet old woman named Muriel and her cranky, abusive husband Eustace on an isolated farm in a place the show only ever refers to as the middle of nowhere, Kansas. And in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, horrifying things happen. The show came to be after the release of a short called The Chicken from Outer Space, made by John R. Dilworth, Courage's creator, in 1996. The short featured an evil alien chicken flying around in a UFO, who visits the farm and tries to turn Muriel and Eustace into evil alien chickens. But the day gets saved by the old couple's cowardly little dog, who, through a series of loony, cartoony shenanigans, defeats the chicken. And somehow, someone at Cartoon Network thought this was worth expanding into a 4-season-long television series. Best idea anyone's ever had.
We interrupt this program to bring you Courage the Cowardly Dog Show!
So with crazy eccentric cartoonist John R. Dilworth at the helm, and wonderfully creative head writer David Stephen Cohen at his side, the extremely weird Courage the Cowardly Dog Show began airing in 1999. And the first real episode, A Night at the Cat's Motel, is actually one of my favorites.
Welcome to the Cat's Motel. I'm Katz.
In this episode, Courage, Eustace, and Muriel find themselves having to stay at a roadside motel, owned by a tall, sinister-looking cat. And secretly, it turns out, this cat has a large collection of giant mutant spiders living in the hotel that he feeds his unsuspecting guests to. Watching this episode as a kid was pretty spooky, and it wasn't even really because of the spiders, but more because of the villain Katz himself.
Now you're going to learn why no one ever checks out of the Cat's Motel.
I love evil, spooky cartoon villains. And I think the reason I like this show so much is because it's pretty much entirely about evil, spooky cartoon villains. Almost every episode introduces a different villain, or a different unknown supernatural creature Courage has to deal with. Sometimes it's Bigfoot, sometimes it's zombies, sometimes it's a giant Lovecraftian starfish making its way across the landscape and destroying everything. Oh, and of course, sometimes it's Muriel's beloved nephew, Fred.
Courage! Come and meet Fred!
Who just so happens to be a mentally insane barber who only speaks in rhymes.
I said, my name is Fred, and I've been very naughty.
7 years old. It was good vibes for a 7-year-old. It was fun watching that as 7 years old.
I think this was the first horror-themed cartoon I ever remember seeing as a child. And it might just have been the only one that actually succeeded in being, at the very least, unsettling. Mention Courage to anyone who grew up in the late 90s or early 2000s, and they'll probably respond with,
Was it always intended to be a comedy and horror?
Yeah, sure. I love horror. I mean, my brother and I, we would get tremendous satisfaction and glee from plotting to scare our mother in any possible way. You know, life is so terrifying. I guess the only way to survive, you have to be as scary as it is.
That was from Rebel Taxi's interview with John R. Dilworth. If you haven't watched it, you should. It's really good. To be fair, not every episode is necessarily frightening, and most of the humor in the show isn't too different from other old slapstick cartoons, you know, with lots of screaming, lots of shouting, kooky sound effects, and dopey over-the-top violence. But still, there was something going on here. There was something that made Courage different from other cartoons. But what was it?
It was eggplants.
Well, first of all, it's worth pointing out Courage had a really iconic, delightfully surreal style to it. The visuals and the settings were always way out of the ordinary. The show had a lot of simple, cute-looking animation, but it would always constantly blend in crazy mixed media, like claymation, paper cutouts, gritty, realistic background textures, and whatever the hell this guy is.
Return the slab, or suffer my curse.
Why are you Paper Mario dancing? But what really set Courage apart from anything else, undoubtedly, was the music. This cartoon had the most random, indefinable, experimental music I'd ever heard in a children's show, at least back then. Almost every villain in every episode had their own unique original theme.
First mate Muriel, this is Captain Katz.
May I help you? Yes, thank you. May I help you?
Every time you'd hear music, it was always a different genre. I don't know how to describe it, but it makes my ears happy. Beyond the style and the music, though, if you really want to nail down what made the show original, you really don't need to look any farther than the characters.
Eustace, if you'd get me a vacuum cleaner, we wouldn't have all this dust.
We don't need no vacuum.
Courage the Cowardly Dog had such an undeniably unconventional set of characters. Like, just imagine having to pitch this thing to a studio. Wait, so what is it your show is about again?
It's about a sweet old woman with a Scottish accent, an angry old man, and their abused dog who screams a lot.
Right. And what is it that happens in the show?
The dog screams a lot.
What's really cool about the characters, though, is not only are they unconventional, but they also fit in to the world, because they're just as weird as anything else in the show. Muriel, for instance, is a typical kind old woman who bakes cookies and spends her time sitting in a rocking chair. But she also occasionally gets possessed by demons. She also goes on trips to the big city to play the sitar on stage. Because yeah, she plays the sitar. Eustace is the same level of weird. He's a typical crabby old man who reads the newspaper and uses his tools to fix things when they break. But he also passionately hates Courage for some reason, and he occasionally gets together evil groups of villains to conspire against him.
No! What'd I do?
But Courage is probably the weirdest character of them all. Sometimes Courage talks.
The things I do for love.
Sometimes he doesn't talk. At all. In some episodes, he'll speak in fluent sentences the whole time, but in some episodes, he'll just babble in gibberish. In some ways, he just seems like a purple-colored ripoff of Scooby-Doo, but unlike Scooby-Doo, he's utterly insane.
Right.
There's actually a theory about this show that Courage is just a normal dog, and he's protective and easily startled like most normal dogs are, and all the scary monsters he sees are merely psychological, like we're seeing the world through a fearful dog's eyes. It's a cool theory, but like I said earlier, the show isn't just about fear. That's another thing that makes it so special to me. This show tackles all emotions.
Eustace is gone. Oh, my Eustace. I knew something was wrong.
There's this episode about depression, for instance, called The Tower of Dr. Jalos, where a sour, bitter villain is attacking the city of nowhere with cannonballs that make people unhappy. Dr. Jalos doesn't want to hurt or kill anyone necessarily. He just wants the world to be unhappy, because he's unhappy. What really fascinates me about this episode, though, isn't the villain himself, but actually his henchman, Rat. All throughout the episode, Dr. Jalos feels depressed, and he orders Rat to give him hugs.
Rat, come here, Rat. Give me a hug.
But Rat seems irritated and detached.
You call this a hug? You're not even trying!
At the end of the episode, Muriel's happy plum recipe creates pink cannonballs that make everyone happy and save the day. But the pink cannonballs don't make Rat happy. No, instead, they make him cry. Oh? I always loved the idea that Rat needed to cry. Almost like he was so out of touch with his emotions, he felt nothing. And he couldn't feel happy without first feeling sad. That's pretty freaking deep for a kid's show, man.
Come here, Rat. Give me a hug.
There are also other episodes with rather deep subjects, like The Last of the Star Makers, which touches upon life and death.
How lovely. She's becoming a garden.
Believe it or not, there's even an episode that touches upon lesbianism. Yeah, I'm not even kidding. There's this episode called The Mask that touches upon lesbianism, violence against women, sexism against men, acceptance of reality, judgment of others, and moral self-improvement.
I'm sorry for the terrible things I've said.
That's okay, Muriel. Nobody's perfect.
I talk more about it, but I don't know, maybe I'll have to make a top 10 Courage episodes later on or something, if I'm not too busy doing other important things. So yeah, there was definitely more to this show than meets the eye. Courage the Cowardly Dog was dumb and it was goofy as all hell, but it was also artistic. It tackled a lot of unique ideas under the surface, and it made me feel emotions. But of course, the show is most remembered for one emotion mainly, and that was fear. Fear was the emotion at center stage, and fear was what Courage was mostly about. It was about fearful creatures, fearful places, and fearful things happening to a fearful character overcoming his fear.
Oh my poor thing. Out here all alone? What courage you have.
The show essentially tells kids the world is a scary place. Things aren't always going to be okay. And in fact, they may never be okay. But what is okay is being afraid.
Simply being courageous won't necessarily make your fears go away. But facing them, accepting your fears, changing your fears, fighting or understanding what they are, that's courage. Courage is not cowardly. He is a hero. He's an alternative hero. He's a character with anxiety, afraid of absolutely everything. But across all the horrible trials he faces, he is brave. To me, Courage the Cowardly Dog is perfect. And that's because he's beautifully, wonderfully imperfect.
You're beautiful as you are, Courage. With all your imperfections, you can do anything.